chilling wind tore through the fabric of my parka, a relentless reminder of the harshness of Antarctica, the land of eternal frost and whispers of forgotten ages. My name is Dr. Ethan Carmichael, a geologist with a penchant for discovering secrets hidden beneath layers of time and ice. Our expedition had started as any other, a scientific endeavor to explore the uncharted territories of the inner continent, driven by curiosity and a thirst for knowledge. We were a small team, just 5 of us, each an expert in our own field, united by a single purpose: to uncover what lay beneath the eternal snow. The days passed in a blur of white and gray, the sun scarcely breaking through the dense clouds, casting the landscape in perpetual twilight. Our base camp was a cluster of tents, nestled in a valley, protected from the worst of the winds. It was there, amid the hum of generators and the crackling of radios, that the call came through, a discovery that would change everything. A satellite image had revealed an anomaly, a structure hidden beneath the ice, a pyramid, its sharp lines unmistakable even through the distortion of snow and time. The idea of a man-made structure buried in this desolate place was both exhilarating and improbable. We set out at dawn, our snowmobiles slicing through the drifts, the coordinates leading us to the site like an invisible thread, pulling us towards a destiny we had not foreseen. The closer we got, the more palpable the air became, thick with an anticipation that bordered on the tangible. It was as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for us to uncover its secret. We arrived at the coordinates, and there it was, the peak of an obsidian pyramid protruding from the ice, its surface polished and black, creating a stark contrast against the pristine white. The sight was surreal, a shard of darkness piercing through the heart of the frozen wasteland. We stood in awe, momentarily forgetting the cold, each of us lost in thoughts of what this could mean. A silence hung over us, heavy and expectant, until the wind picked up once more, breaking the spell. The decision to excavate was unanimous. Days turned into weeks as we worked tirelessly, our efforts a race against the looming winter that threatened to seal the pyramid beneath layers of snow once more. As the structure emerged, more intricate and larger than we initially imagined, it revealed carvings and symbols unlike anything we had encountered before. There was an inexplicable harmony to its design, a perfection that defied time and place. It was ancient, older than any civilization we knew, and yet it was here, defying logic and history. It was during one of these long nights, the sky a cascade of stars shimmering in the aurora's glow, that the first disturbance occurred. I awoke to the sound of whispering, a soft susurration that seemed to emanate from the pyramid itself. I lay still, my breath visible in the frozen air, listening intently as the sound grew clearer, words forming in a language I had never heard yet somehow understood. They spoke of awakening, of a presence waiting beneath the ice, of eons of slumber soon to end. I told myself it was a dream, a figment of an overworked mind. Yet, the whispers lingered, a haunting melody that played at the edge of consciousness. I found myself drawn to the pyramid, compelled to touch its surface, to feel the cold, smooth obsidian beneath my fingers. The contact was electric, a jolt that traveled through me, igniting a spark of something ancient and profound. I recoiled, shaken to my core, but the allure was undeniable. The others noticed my growing obsession, their concerned glances following me as I spent more and more time at the site. Dr. EERIE Kincaid, our archaeologist, shared my fascination, though hers was tempered by caution. She spoke of legends, of tales whispered among indigenous tribes of entities that dwelt beneath the earth, waiting for the right moment to rise. Her words, though meant to caution, only fueled my curiosity. As the excavation continued, the disturbances grew more frequent. Each member of the team began experiencing vivid dreams, visions of vast cities shrouded in darkness, inhabited by beings whose eyes burned with an inner fire. We woke in cold sweats, our minds filled with images that refused to fade with the morning light. It was as if the pyramid was reaching into our very souls, unraveling the barriers of reality and dream. Tensions rose as the dreams became nightmares, vivid and suffocating. Dr. Mark Harlan, our climatologist, was the first to crack under the pressure. He claimed to hear voices even in waking hours, a cacophony that demanded recognition. He would sit outside his tent, eyes fixed on the pyramid, mumbling to himself until exhaustion pulled him into an uneasy sleep. The isolation of our location, the ceaseless cold, and the haunting presence of the pyramid began to take a toll. We were 5 strangers in a frozen wilderness, bound together by duty, yet drifting apart by fear. The obsidian structure loomed over us, a monument of forgotten power and unfathomable intent. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, each shadow and reflection a testament to its enigmatic allure. The climax came unexpectedly, a culmination of tension and dread that had been building since the moment we laid eyes on the pyramid. And then Dr. Kincaid was the one who discovered the entrance, a hidden seam in the stone that revealed a passageway descending into darkness. We hesitated, knowing instinctively that crossing this threshold would be a point of no return. The air was alive with static, the whispers now a symphony of voices calling us forward. We ventured inside, our flashlights piercing the thick darkness, revealing walls lined with more carvings, each telling stories of epochs long past. The passage spiraled downwards, leading us to a chamber vast and echoing, dominated by a dais upon which rested a stone sarcophagus, its surface inscribed with the same strange symbols that adorned the pyramid's exterior. A sense of foreboding hung in the air, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. It was then that I understood the true nature of the pyramid, a realization that struck like a bolt of lightning. This was not a tomb, but a prison, crafted to contain something beyond our understanding. The whispers grew louder, urging me to open the sarcophagus, to release what had been trapped for millennia. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the stone, torn between the call of the unknown and the fear of the consequences. In the end, it was not my decision alone. The others, driven by an unseen force, moved as one, our collective will bending towards the inevitable. Together, we heaved a lid aside, revealing a figure encased in obsidian, a being that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Its eyes opened, and in that moment, I felt the weight of ages, the crushing realization of what we had done. The presence within the chamber shifted, a ripple of energy that spread outwards, shaking the very foundation of the pyramid. We stumbled back, overwhelmed by the sudden rush of power, the echoes of ancient voices rising to a crescendo. The being stepped from its confines, a graceful, terrible beauty that defied description. It looked upon us with a gaze that saw beyond flesh and bone, into the very essence of our being, and then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The figure vanished, leaving behind a silence so profound it was deafening. We staggered from the chamber, our minds reeling, the reality of our situation sinking in. We had awakened something that should have remained buried beneath the ice. In the days that followed, the dreams ceased, but the feeling of being watched remained. The pyramid stood silent once more, its purpose fulfilled, its prisoner freed. We left Antarctica, our mission a success in the eyes of the world. But within each of us lingered a fear, a knowledge that we had unleashed a force beyond comprehension. Now, back in the comfort of civilization, I find no solace. The shadows are deeper, the nights longer, the sense of another presence constant. I wonder if the world will see the ripples of our actions, if the whispers will spread beyond the icy confines of the Antarctic. And I realize that the true horror lies not in what we discovered, but in the knowledge that we are not alone, that there are ancient powers waiting in the dark, beyond our understanding, beyond our control. In the heart of the EERIE Mountains, nestled amidst snow-laden peaks and dense pine forests, lay a secret that had been buried for decades. The base, officially marked on maps as a weather monitoring station, was in fact a military facility hidden from the prying eyes of the world. This was not a place one stumbled upon, nor was it spoken of outside the circles of high-ranking officials and those unfortunate enough to be stationed there. I was one of the latter, an analyst sent to interpret data of unknown origin, and my arrival was shrouded in bureaucratic haze. The journey to the base was uneventful. A helicopter ride over the austere landscape revealed little except endless stretches of white and the occasional glimpse of a frozen river. The silence was comforting, a stark contrast to my life back in the city. The base itself was a collection of nondescript buildings, dull gray against the snow, their utilitarian design betraying nothing of what lay within. I was greeted with a warmth of indifference by the handful of personnel stationed there. It was a place that ran on routine, the type of place where days blended into nights without meaning. My quarters were sparse but adequate. The walls were bare save for a small window that offered a view of the mountains. There was serenity in the isolation, a sense of detachment from the world beyond. My duties were simple: monitor radio signals and data transmissions, ensure everything remained within normal parameters. On the surface, it was monotonous, but I found solace in the simplicity of it all. The first disturbance was subtle, a whisper in the static. It came late one night as I sat alone in the dim glow of the monitoring room. The equipment, a relic from the Cold War era, hummed softly, the familiar whirring of the machines lulling me into a peaceful monotony. Then, amidst the rhythmic beeping and the endless stream of numbers displayed on the screens, something caught my attention. A signal, faint yet persistent, threading its way through the noise. At first I dismissed it as interference, a fluke caused by atmospheric conditions, but the signal continued to appear at irregular intervals, always the same frequency, tinged with a pattern that seemed almost intentional. I noted it, logged it meticulously as protocol demanded, and set it aside. It was easy to lose oneself in the mundane tasks, to ignore the unsettling feeling that accompanied the signal's presence. As days turned into weeks, the pattern grew more pronounced, the signal demanding my attention with increasing insistence. It was as if something was reaching out from beyond the ordinary, a presence hidden in the fabric of the static. I shared my findings with a colleague, a technician named Victor, whose expertise in this field was renowned within our confined world. Together, we analyzed the data, our curiosity piqued by the strange occurrence. Victor was a man of logic and reason, grounded in the scientific method, yet even he seemed perturbed by the anomalies we encountered. It's as if someone's trying to communicate, he mused one evening, his voice barely rising above a whisper. His words echoed in the confines of the monitoring room, mingling with the static that had become a constant companion. Our investigations led us deeper into the archives, dusty records and forgotten files documenting the base's obscure history. We unearthed reports of unusual phenomena dating back to the facility's inception, whispers of experiments conducted under the guise of national security, of attempts to harness forces beyond human comprehension. There were tales of disappearances, of personnel who had vanished without a trace, their fates sealed by the forbidding landscape. The more we delved, the more the line between reality and nightmare blurred. The signal continued its relentless march, a beacon beckoning us towards an unknown destination. Victor and I became consumed by it, our conversation circling around theories and possibilities. Was it an echo from the past, a remnant of some forgotten experiment, or was it something else? Something alive. The escalation was inevitable. One night, the signal intensified, its presence overwhelming the equipment, sending our instruments into a frenzied dance. Alarms blared, their shrill cries reverberating through the base. Lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that seemed to pulse in time with the signal's heartbeat. Panic spread among the personnel, their faces masks of fear and confusion. In the chaos, Victor and I remained tethered to our monitors, our eyes locked on the screens as they displayed lines of indecipherable code. It was a language we could not comprehend, yet it spoke to us in ways that transcended words. The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with tension, as if the facility itself was holding its breath. "There's something here," Victor said, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. His eyes were wide, a mixture of awe and dread. I felt it too, a presence lurking at the edge of perception, an awareness that defied explanation. It was as if the mountain itself had come alive, its ancient secrets awakening from a long slumber. In the following days, the atmosphere within the base shifted. Conversations became hushed, filled with a pervasive unease. The signal remained constant, a reminder of the invisible forces at play. Victor and I continued our work, driven by a compulsion we could not escape. We were drawn to the mystery, even as it seemed to unravel the fabric of our understanding. The climax came with a storm, a howling blizzard that descended upon the mountains with a fury unmatched. The winds battered the facility, the walls groaning under the onslaught. Visibility was reduced to nothing, the world outside obscured by a swirling mass of snow. Inside, the base was plunged into darkness, the power flickering in and out. In the midst of the storm, the signal reached its zenith. It roared through the equipment, a deafening crescendo that threatened to shatter the very foundations of our reality. Victor and I were helpless, our attempts to stabilize the systems futile. The base became a realm of shadows and echoes, our world reduced to a nightmare from which there was no escape. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noise ceased, the storm abated, leaving in its wake a profound silence. The signal was gone, leaving only an empty void where it had been. Victor and I stared at each other, the room heavy with the weight of what we had experienced. We were changed, marked by the encounter with the unknown. In the aftermath, life at the base returned to a semblance of normalcy. The signal was officially dismissed as a technical anomaly, a glitch in outdated equipment. But those of us who had been there knew differently. We had glimpsed into the heart of something vast and incomprehensible, a reality that lay just beyond the veil of our understanding. Lingering fear settled into our bones, a reminder of the encounter that defied explanation. Victor left soon after, transferred to another post. his departure marked by an unspoken agreement to never speak of what had transpired. I remained, my curiosity tempered by a newfound respect for the unknown. Every so often I find myself drawn to the monitoring room, the faint hum of the machines a comfort in the stillness. I listen for the signal, half expecting it to return, to reach out once more from the depths of the static. It never does, yet the fear remains, a quiet reminder that there are forces at play that transcend our understanding. They're still out there, the unspeakable horrors hidden within the mountains, waiting, perhaps, for another chance to make their presence known. And as I sit alone in the cold silence, I wonder if we will ever be prepared to face them. I grew up hearing tales about the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery that has haunted the Russian wilderness for decades. My grandfather, a man of few words and many secrets, was stationed at a Soviet research facility in the Ural Mountains during the time of the incident. Although he never directly spoke of it, the shadow of those events always seemed to linger in the corners of our conversations. As a child, I would sit at his feet, listening to his stories about the mountains, the snow, and the eerie feeling that something was always watching. It was only after his death that I found his journal, hidden away in a false Bedham drawer of his old writing desk. Normal life in the Soviet research facility seemed mundane at first. Nestled between jagged peaks and dense forests, the facility was isolated from the rest of the world. Its purpose was veiled in secrecy, officially a center for geological research, but there were whispers among the staff about something more. Scientists and military personnel worked side by side, their duties overlapping in ways that were never fully explained. Grandfather was there as a radio technician, maintaining the equipment that connected them to the outside world. It was a place where the wind howled incessantly, and the silence of the snow-covered landscape was broken only by the occasional rumble of avalanches. The facility's staff were a mix of grizzled veterans and fresh-faced recruits, all bound together by the unspoken understanding that curiosity was dangerous. For years, life trundled on with a regularity that was almost comforting. People came and went, and the seasons changed in their predictable march from winter to summer and back again. But one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the snow, an incident disrupted the normalcy that had blanketed the research facility. A team of geologists had ventured out for a routine survey and failed to return. The weather had been clear, and they were experienced, so their disappearance was unexpected. My grandfather was among the first dispatched to search for them. As they trudged through the gathering dusk, a strange unease settled over the search party, an inexplicable feeling of being watched. Their footsteps crunched rhythmically through the snow, each step echoing into the vast emptiness around them. Hours passed, and the sun vanished completely, leaving the men with only the pale light of their lanterns to guide them. Grandfather wrote of a pervasive chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Different from the natural cold of the mountains, it was a chill of foreboding, a warning whispered by the wind. They found the geologist's campsite abandoned, tents still standing, supplies scattered as if in hurried flight. No footprints led away from the site, and no signs of struggle could be found. It was as though the earth had swallowed them whole. The searchers called out into the void, their voices swallowed by the oppressive silence. The first disturbance was unsettling enough, but what followed began to unravel the fabric of reality for those confined within the facility. Reports of strange noises echoed through the corridors at night, sibilant whispers and faint tapping sounds that set teeth on edge. Doors opened and closed on their own, as if unseen hands guided them. Equipment, carefully calibrated and maintained, began to malfunction in ways that defied logic. Everyone seemed on edge, nerves frayed by the inexplicable events. Grandfather described it as if an unseen presence had infiltrated their ranks, sowing discord and fear. It was during this time that whispers of a supernatural entity began to circulate. Some claimed to have seen shadows move against the light. Others felt a profound sense of dread that clung to them even in the brightest of days. As the weeks passed, the disturbances escalated. More people disappeared, not just into the mountains, but within the confines of the facility itself. It was as if the very walls conspired against them, leading people astray. My grandfather wrote of one particularly chilling encounter. While working late one night in the radio room, he heard a faint voice over the static, a voice that called his name. He was alone, the door locked from the inside. When he spoke of it, his voice trembled with the memory. Panic gripped the facility as the reality of their situation became undeniable. Meetings were held, theories proposed, ranging from mass hysteria to foreign sabotage. Yet none could explain the shadows flitting just out of sight, or the sense of something ancient stirring beneath the mountain. The military presence increased, armed guards patrolling the halls with eyes wide open, but even they couldn't shield themselves from the pervasive fear. The climax came one stormy night when a blizzard trapped everyone within the facility. The wind howled like a banshee, and the power flickered ominously. Grandfather wrote of running down the halls, lantern in hand, and shadows twisted and danced in the corners of his vision. He felt it then, the full force of the malevolent presence, an entity that loomed just outside the periphery of his sight, promising madness and despair. It was in the radio room that the final confrontation occurred. The air buzzed with electricity, the equipment crackling with sudden bursts of static and distorted voices. Grandfather felt as if the very fabric of reality stretched thin, threatening to tear apart. In that moment, he claimed to have seen it, a figure of darkness and dread, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It whispered to him in a language he did not understand, but innately feared. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as he fought to maintain his sanity. Hours later, the storm broke, and with it, the presence seemed to withdraw, leaving behind a facility in disarray and minds teetering on the brink of collapse. Grandfather and the others emerged into a world that seemed untouched by the horrors they had faced, yet the knowledge of it lingered like a shadow, always present. The facility was closed shortly after, the official explanation citing structural instability due to geological activity. Yet, the men and women who had served there knew the truth, though they dared not speak of it openly. My grandfather returned home, a changed man, his laughter less frequent, his eyes shadowed with the memories of that mountain. Even now, as I close his journal and stare out at the quiet, snow-covered landscape beyond my window, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. The stories of the Dyatlov Pass and the research facility blend together, tales of madness, mystery, and malevolent forces that defy understanding. The fear lingers, an uninvited guest that haunts the recesses of my mind. Somewhere, in the silent expanse of the Ural Mountains, the entity waits, patient and eternal, whispering to those who dare listen. I grew up under the shadow of the Ural Mountains, a place where the wind carried whispers of secrets long buried beneath icy expanses. My grandfather, a stoic man with eyes that seemed to peer beyond the present, often spoke of his years working at a Soviet military base nestled between the peaks. Although he rarely divulged the tasks assigned to him, I always sensed there was more to his story than the clatter of typewriters and the clatter of typewriters and the hum of communication radio. My childhood was one of ordinary rhythms, marked by the clinking sounds of my grandmother's pots in the kitchen and the rhythmic tapping of my grandfather's cane against the wooden floorboards. We lived in an old dacha, its walls adorned with memories and sepia tones, softened by time. Life was simple, predictable, a tapestry of routine woven with strands of family lore, and the subtle, almost imperceptible undercurrents of unease. It wasn't until one particularly harsh winter evening, when the wind howled like a beast starved for warmth, that my grandfather let slip the first threads of a tale that would change everything I thought I knew. We were huddled around the stove, sipping on hot tea, when the conversation turned, as it often did, to the peculiarities of life in the mountains. "What do you know of the Dyatlov Pass incident?" he asked, his voice a measured softness. I had heard the name before, a mystery wrapped in layers of speculation and dread. 9 hikers had met their end under circumstances so bizarre that they defied rational explanation. I recounted the story as best I could, but something in his gaze made it clear that my understanding was incomplete. "There are things," he said, "that the world is not ready to hear. Things that I, for the sake of my own sanity, should have left hidden." His words, like a match to kindling, sparked a curiosity within me that refused to be extinguished. I pressed him for more, and perhaps it was the isolation of the storm or the fatigue of age that loosened his tongue that night. He spoke of a military experiment gone wrong, a venture into realms where man was never meant to tread. The base, he explained, was a place of secrets. They had been tasked with exploring the limits of human endurance, the effects of sound on the psyche. It was during these experiments that they stumbled upon something they could neither control nor comprehend. A presence, an entity that seemed to feed off the chaos and fear their tests induced. The first disturbance, as he described it, was subtle. Equipment malfunctioned. Recordings captured noises that no one could explain. A wailing, not unlike the cries of the wind outside, yet imbued with a sinister clarity. Soldiers reported feelings of unease, shadows that followed them despite the harsh lights that lined the corridors. As the days turned into weeks, the disturbances escalated. What began as whispers became screams that echoed through the halls at night, the kind that gnawed at the corners of one's mind. One by one, the men stationed there began to unravel, their spirits worn thin by the relentless assault of unseen forces. The climax came one fateful night, a night my grandfather would never forget. A storm, fierce and unyielding, raged outside as the base was plunged into darkness. The screams, louder than ever, rose to a fever pitch, reverberating off the metal walls and burrowing deep into the soul. Men turned on one another, driven to madness by the cacophony that now felt as if it came from within. In the chaos, my grandfather managed to escape. Driven by a primal instinct to survive, he fled into the snow, the screaming following him, a siren's call that threatened to pull him back into the abyss. He ran until his legs gave way, collapsing in the arms of a search party who had been dispatched to retrieve those who had not returned from their posting. The aftermath was a tangle of confusion and silence. The base was shut down, the official story wrapped in the shroud of national security. The incident at the Dyatlov Pass was attributed to natural causes, a convenient scapegoat for a world not yet willing to face the horrors that lay beyond its comprehension. Even now, As I recount his tale, I feel a chill creep through me, a lingering fear that the entity my grandfather spoke of still wanders those windswept peaks, waiting for its next victim. He passed away a few years ago, taking with him the full truth of what he experienced, yet his words remain with me, a haunting echo that I cannot silence, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of understanding. I often find myself drawn to the mountains, as if some part of me seeks to confront the specter that haunted my grandfather. I stand at the edge of the pass, the wind tugging at my coat, and listen. The world is quiet, save for the whispers of the wind, but deep within, I sense it. The presence, the entity waiting, and I wonder, as the cold bites at my skin, what it is that awaits those who dare to venture too far into the unknown. The story, like the mountains themselves, is a testament to the power of secrets and the price of curiosity. My grandfather knew what happened in the Dyatlov Pass, and in telling me, he passed on a burden that I now carry, a reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknowable, the safe and the sinister, and so the mystery endures, as eternal as the mountains, as haunting as the screams that once pierced the night. The Ural Mountains have always held a peculiar fascination for me. Their vastness, the untamed wilderness, and the tales woven around them are unlike any other. For years, I had heard whispers of the Dyatlov Pass incident, a mystery shrouded in intrigue and unanswered questions. 9 hikers, skilled and prepared, perished under circumstances that continued to baffle even the most seasoned investigators. It was a story of thrill and horror, cloaked in the strange and the supernatural. I am a writer by trade, and the Dyatlov Pass incident called to me like a siren song. My interest was more than mere curiosity. It was an obsession. So, I packed my things and set out for the Ural Mountains, determined to uncover something, anything, that could shed light on what truly happened during those chilling winter nights of 1959. Arriving in Yekaterinburg, I rented a modest room in a rundown hotel, choosing comfort over luxury. The locals were friendly but guarded when I mentioned my intentions of heading to Kholat-Syakhl, the infamous Mountain of the Dead. It seemed the legend still held a powerful sway over the townsfolk, who responded with nervous laughter and averted eyes. My first few days were spent gathering supplies and information. I sought out old records, newspaper clippings, and importantly, the personal accounts of those who had been involved in the original rescue operations. But it was as if a shadow loomed over the truth. Documents were missing, testimonies were altered, and an unsettling pattern of military intervention emerged, suggesting a cover-up. Driven by these discoveries, I made preparations for my journey to the pass. I hired a local guide, Alexei, a grizzled man whose age belied his strength and endurance. He was familiar with the route, having traversed it many times in his youth. However, when I explained my purpose, his expression darkened. He warned me of the mountain's strange aura and the eerie occurrences that had been reported by the few adventurers who dared to return. Unfazed, I insisted. I needed to see it with my own eyes. We set off early one morning, the air crisp and biting. The landscape was both beautiful and daunting, with snow-covered peaks rising sharply against the pale sky. As we hiked, Alexei shared stories passed down through generations, tales of spirits, of lights dancing in the sky, and of an insidious presence that crept through the forest at night. At first, the journey was uneventful. The rhythmic crunch of our footsteps in the snow, the breath of the wind through the pines, and the occasional call of wildlife created a serene, almost hypnotic atmosphere. But as we ventured deeper into the wilderness, an unsettling feeling began to take hold. I can't quite explain it. It was as if the very air had changed, growing denser, almost tangible in its oppressiveness. The first disturbance came as night fell. We had set up camp beneath the stars, the fire casting long shadows that danced across the snow. I awoke to a sound, a low, mournful howl that echoed through the valley. It was unlike any creature I had heard before, resonating with an unnatural frequency that set my nerves on edge. Alexei was already awake, his face pale in the firelight. "Do you hear it?" he asked, his voice a whisper barely audible above the crackling flame. I nodded, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. We stayed awake, tense and alert, until the first light of dawn chased away the shadows and the sound faded into silence. The next day, we reached Kolatsiakl. The site where the tent had been found lay desolate, marked by a simple memorial, erected by the families of the hikers. I stood there, overlooking the vast expanse of snow, and tried to imagine what they had experienced. But the mountain held its secrets close, offering no clues to the tragedy that had unfolded here. It was then that Alexei pointed to the sky, his eyes wide with fear. Above us, ethereal lights danced, flickering in hues of green and violet. They moved with purpose, weaving patterns that seemed almost sentient. The locals had whispered of such phenomena, describing them as spirits, or perhaps something far more sinister. I felt an inexplicable pull, a compulsion to move closer. Alexei grabbed my arm, his grip firm. "No," he said firmly. "This is not for us." Reluctantly, I agreed, but a part of me yearned to unravel the mystery that hovered just beyond my grasp. That night, as we huddled in our tent, the temperature plummeted. The wind howled with a ferocity that shook the very fabric of our shelter. It was then that I heard the voices, faint and distant at first. They grew louder, more insistent, a cacophony of whispers that filled my ears. They spoke in an unknown tongue, each syllable imbued with an otherworldly resonance. Alexei appeared not to hear them, his expression one of grim determination as he focused on keeping the tent secure. But for me, each whisper was a thread, weaving a tapestry of horror that threatened to unravel my sanity. Sleep was elusive, and when I finally succumbed, my dreams were haunted by visions of the hikers. Their faces, twisted in fear, appeared before me, eyes wide with terror as they fled from an unseen force. I awoke drenched in sweat, the echoes of their screams lingering in my mind. Over the following days, the disturbances escalated. Strange footprints appeared around our campsite, the patterns unfamiliar and unsettling. Wine, equipment failed without explanation, and the air crackled with a palpable tension. Even Alexei, seasoned and stoic, could not disguise his unease. The climax came on the fifth night. The air was still, expectant, as though the mountain itself held its breath. We were sitting by the fire when a sudden, intense pressure descended upon us, forcing us to our knees. The ground trembled, and the lights returned, more vivid and menacing than before. They coalesced into a form, an entity that defied comprehension, its presence an amalgamation of light and shadow, substance and void. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a primal fear that coursed through my veins. The entity spoke, not with words, but with emotions. Overwhelming waves of despair, confusion, and anger that threatened to drown me. It was then that I understood. This was what the hikers had encountered, a force beyond human understanding, one that resided in the liminal space between worlds. As quickly as it had appeared, the entity dissolved into the night, leaving us shaken and breathless. The silence that followed was absolute, a void that swallowed the remnants of our courage. We left the mountain the next morning, moving with a speed born of desperation. The return journey blurred into a haze of exhaustion and anxiety, my mind replaying the events in a relentless loop. Back in Yekaterinburg, I tried to make sense of what I had experienced. The mystery of Dyatlov Pass remained unsolved, the truth elusive and obscured by layers of fear and myth. I returned home, burdened with more questions than answers, my heart heavy with the weight of knowledge I could neither understand nor share. Even now, months later, the experience lingers at the edges of my consciousness, a shadow that flits through my dreams, a whisper that calls to me in the quiet moments. I have tried to distance myself, to bury the memories beneath the mundane routines of daily life, but the mountain's call is insistent, a siren song that haunts my waking hours. The official report remains unchanged, a sterile account that offers no real answers, but I know what I saw, what I felt. And as I write this, I am filled with an uneasy certainty that the truth of Dyatlov Pass lies not in the realms of the known, but in the spaces between reality and nightmare, where shadows dance and whispers echo in the chill of the Ural wind. The mountain air was crisp and invigorating as I made my way up the winding path towards Solstice Haven, the renowned nudist retreat that sat perched above the valley like some forgotten temple. I had come seeking solitude and a chance to reconnect with myself, away from the relentless drumbeat of city life. The retreat promised a return to natural simplicity, where one could shed not only clothes, but the burdens of modern existence. The path was lined with towering pines, their needles whispering secrets in the gentle breeze. As I approached the main lodge, I was greeted by the sight of others who had made the pilgrimage to this secluded sanctuary. It was an eclectic mix of individuals, artists, writers, and those simply seeking escape. All were united in the pursuit of liberation, their bodies unadorned and unashamed. My first few days at the retreat were serene. Each morning I joined the others in meditation, the tranquility of the mountains seeping into my very bones. We ate communal meals at long wooden tables where laughter and conversation flowed as freely as the sparkling spring water we drank. The food was simple yet robust, crafted from the bounty of the land. It was during one such meal that I noticed something peculiar, a subtle shift in the atmosphere that was both imperceptible and undeniable. It began with a new arrival, a man who introduced himself as Elias. Tall and lean, with an unsettling intensity in his gaze, he quickly made himself known among the group. There was something about him that set my nerves on edge, though I could not pinpoint why. Elias spoke often of the old ways, of rituals and communion with nature that went beyond mere nudity. His words were hypnotic, weaving through the group like a spell. Some were captivated, their eyes bright with fervor, while others exchanged uneasy glances, as though sensing an undercurrent that lay beneath the surface of his rhetoric. As days turned into nights, Elias's influence grew. He spoke of a feast, the Last Supper he called it, a gathering to honor the spirits of the mountain. The idea was met with enthusiasm by many who saw it as a culmination of their time at the retreat. Yet, there was something in his eyes when he spoke of it, a glimmer that hinted at a deeper, darker purpose. I began to feel a creeping unease, like shadows lengthening at dusk. It was as though the mountain itself had become a living entity, its presence pressing down upon us. Sleep became elusive, as dreams twisted into nightmares that left me gasping for breath. Images of the feast plagued my thoughts, though I could not discern their meaning. The day of the Last Supper arrived with an ominous stillness. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that buzzed beneath the surface. Elias instructed us to gather in the clearing beyond the lodge as the sun began its descent. The sky blazed with the colors of fire and blood, casting an eerie glow over the scene. The feast was laid out on a great table, an opulent spread that seemed incongruous with the simplicity of the retreat. Fruits and vegetables, rich and abundant, were arranged with artistic flair. Yet it was the centerpiece that drew my eye, a massive covered dish that dominated the table. Elias took his place at the head, raising a glass to the assembled group. "Tonight, we honor the spirits of this sacred land," he intoned, his voice carrying over the gathering like a clarion call. "We partake in the bounty of the earth, connecting with the cycle of life and death." As he spoke, attendants moved to uncover the dish, and I felt my heart begin to pound with a dread I couldn't articulate. The cover was lifted, revealing a roast unlike any I had seen. Its aroma was rich and enticing, yet there was something unsettling about it, a wrongness that prickled at the edges of my mind. A whisper of suspicion threaded through the crowd, eyes darting from the dish to Elias and back again. The diners hesitated, forks poised in the air, as though teetering on the brink of revelation. A murmur of concern rippled through the group, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for someone to speak the unthinkable. Elias met our gazes, a faint smile playing on his lips. "This is a sacred meal," he said softly, as if coaxing us to trust him. "To partake is to honor our connection to all living things." It was then that the first of the diners took a bite, their face transformed by an expression of ecstasy that bordered on the sublime. Others followed suit, and soon the air was filled with the sound of eating, the tension dissolving into the celebration of the senses. Yet I could not bring myself to join them, a cold certainty settling into my bones. I watched, transfixed by a mixture of horror and fascination, as they consumed the feast with a fervor that was almost religious. The realization struck me like a physical blow. The dish, the centerpiece of the meal, was not what it seemed. Panic clawed at my throat, and I rose abruptly from the table, the spell of the feast broken. I stumbled back towards the lodge, the sounds of merriment fading behind me. The air was heavy with the scent of the meal, following me like a specter. In the solitude of my room, I tried to collect my thoughts, to make sense of the madness that had unfolded. The mountain seemed to press in on all sides, its silence a rebuke for my cowardice. I knew then that I had to leave, to escape the insidious pull of whatever darkness had taken root at the retreat. I gathered my belongings with trembling hands, casting furtive glances out the window, as though expecting Elias to appear at any moment. The night was thick and impenetrable, the stars obscured by a gathering storm. I could feel the weight of the mountain bearing down upon me, urging me to flee. As I slipped into the night, the forest closed around me, a living entity that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I stumbled down the path, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Fear followed me like a shadow, the specter of what I had witnessed haunting my every step. When I finally reached the road that led back to civilization, I paused, glancing back at the retreat. It stood silent and imposing, a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. The memory of the feast lingered, a specter that clung to my thoughts like a shroud. I knew I would never return to Solstice Haven, nor speak of what I had witnessed. The mountain held its secrets, and I ached with the knowledge of what lay beneath its tranquil facade. The Last Supper had been more than a meal. It was a communion with something ancient and unfathomable, and I could only hope that I had escaped its grasp. Yet, even as I made my way back to the world I had left behind, the lingering fear remained, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness. The mountain had marked me, and I would carry its shadow with me always, a reminder of the darkness that lies in wait beneath the veneer of normalcy. The mountain had always been there, standing guard over the sleepy little town nestled at its base. Its trails were well trodden by locals and visitors alike, a popular getaway for those seeking solace in nature. For as long as I could remember, I'd been drawn to its cool, shaded paths, like a moth to a flame. The air was always crisper up there, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in a way that seemed to cleanse the soul. Every step along the winding trail felt like shedding a layer of unnecessary weight, leaving worries behind as one ascended towards the sky. It was a Saturday morning when I decided to revisit the mountain, a perfect day for a hike. The sun was a golden orb in a cloudless sky, and the promise of peace beckoned me. I packed lightly, bringing only a bottle of water, a small snack, and my well-worn map of the trail network. As I set off, the familiar crunch of gravel underfoot felt like an old song, comfortable and known. For the first hour, everything was as expected. The air was filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the occasional rustle in the undergrowth announced the presence of unseen wildlife. I followed the trail markers, a series of bright orange blazes that led deeper into the forest towards the favorite viewpoint. It was a place I had visited countless times, where the trees parted to reveal a breathtaking panorama of the valley below. However, midway through the hike, something felt subtly different. A whisper at the edge of my awareness, a nagging sensation that something was amiss. I dismissed it as the product of an overactive imagination, perhaps spurred by the isolation of the trail. Yet, as I continued, the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. It was when I reached a familiar fork in the path, where the trail diverged into two distinct routes, that the first true disturbance occurred. I knew this spot well. To the left lay the path to the viewpoint, to the right a longer trail that looped back towards the base of the mountain. Instinctively I turned left, eager to reach my destination, but after a few minutes of walking, the trail began to lose its familiarity. The trees seemed to close in, the light dimming slightly, as if the sun had dipped behind a cloud. Yet the sky remained clear. I stopped, consulting my map, but it offered no new insights. The markers on the trees were still orange, reassuring, yet somehow out of place. I brushed off the unease, reminding myself that it was impossible to get truly lost here. Every trail eventually led back to the town. As I walked on, the unease fermented into something sharper. I kept expecting to crest the ridge and see the valley spread out before me, but the trail seemed to stretch on interminably. My steps quickened, a slight edge of urgency in my pace. I began to notice little things: a tree with a twisted trunk, a rock formation resembling a crouching animal reappearing at odd intervals. Had I been walking in circles? It seemed impossible. The forest was silent, unnervingly so. The usual symphony of birds and insects had faded, leaving a stillness that pressed against my ears. I tried to calm myself, focusing on the rhythm of my steps, the steadiness of my breath, but it was no use. The path itself seemed to warp and shift underfoot, winding back on itself in ways that defied logic. I increased my pace, driven by a sense of urgency that was quickly turning into panic. The sun, now high overhead, offered no guidance, casting everything in harsh midday light. I checked my watch, then my phone. No signal, of course. The device was as useless as the map tucked into my pocket. Time stretched, twisted. I couldn't say how long I walked, but it felt like hours. The twisted tree appeared again, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like skeletal hands. I paused, uncertain, my mind racing. Was my memory failing me? Or was the mountain playing tricks? I doubled back, convinced that I had taken a wrong turn, yet no matter which path I chose, I always found myself back at that same fork, as if the mountain itself had conspired to trap me in this endless loop. I shouted into the stillness, expecting my voice to echo back, but it was swallowed by the trees, leaving no trace. My panic was now a living thing, clawing at the edges of my reason. The forest, once a source of comfort, now felt oppressive, its shadows threatening to close in. I could almost feel the weight of the mountain pressing down, a silent observer of my growing distress. Desperation took hold, and I began to run, heedless of the risks of tripping or falling. My only thought was to break free of this confounding maze, but the faster I ran, the more disoriented I became. The trail twisted like a serpent, leading me back to familiar sights that offered no comfort. I stumbled to a halt, my breath ragged, a stitch in my side demanding attention. I leaned against a tree, trying to gather my thoughts as a chilling realization crept over me. I was trapped. I don't know how long I stood there, the forest pressing in, a green sea that offered no salvation. As fear threatened to overwhelm me, I forced myself to think logically. Every trail must lead somewhere. There had to be a way out. I closed my eyes, reaching for calm, and was struck by a sudden clarity. I needed to retrace my steps calmly, methodically, without giving in to panic. With new resolve, I set off again, following the markers with careful attention. I focused on the details, the texture of the path, the pattern of the leaves overhead. Slowly, the landscape began to change, subtly at first, then more noticeably. I was moving forward, breaking free of the loop. The shift came almost imperceptibly, the oppressive tension lifting as the trees thinned out. I emerged onto a familiar ridge. The valley spread out below in all its glory. Relief washed over me in a dizzying wave, and I sank down onto a nearby rock, my legs trembling with exhaustion. But the sense of triumph was short-lived. As I sat there, taking in the view, an unsettling thought took root in my mind. What if I ventured back into the forest and found myself trapped again? What if this was not a one-time anomaly, but a new reality, an endless loop waiting to ensnare the unwary? The mountain had been a place of refuge, a sanctuary from the chaos of the world. Now it felt like a living entity, aware and watchful, its intentions a mystery. I could hear the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, and it seemed to carry a message just beyond comprehension. To hear the rustle of leaves, the whisper of the wind, and it seemed to carry a message just beyond comprehension. I made my way back down the trail slowly, each step measured and deliberate. The familiar sights of the lower slopes brought some comfort, but the shadow of the experience lingered, casting doubt on the certainty of the ground beneath my feet. By the time I reached the trailhead, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. Back in town, everything seemed normal. Yet my perspective had shifted irrevocably. The mountain loomed in the background, an ever-present reminder of the day's events. I found myself glancing towards it often, as if expecting to see some sign, some confirmation that what had happened was real. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of the hike lingered like a ghost, haunting my thoughts, I spoke to others who had hiked the same trail, but no one had experienced anything similar. It was as if the mountain had singled me out for reasons I couldn't fathom. Life moved on, the routine of daily existence providing a semblance of normalcy, yet in the quiet moments, my mind would drift back to the mountain, to that endless, twisting path. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting, that the loop was still there, biding its time. I found myself returning to the trail in my dreams, again and again, each time hoping for a different outcome, each time finding myself ensnared once more. It was a nightmare I couldn't escape, a reminder of how easily reality could shift beneath one's feet. I never spoke of it to anyone, not really. How could I? It seemed absurd, like a story from a fevered imagination. Yet it was real to me, a truth I carried alone. The mountain had shown me something, its depths, its secrets, and I was forever changed. And so I lived with the knowledge, a quiet whisper at the back of my mind, that the path is still there, waiting. The mountain watches, patient and eternal, its labyrinthine trails a testament to the mysteries that lie just beyond our understanding. And perhaps one day I will find myself drawn back, unable to resist the pull of that silent invitation, the allure of the unknown.